There is a stirring in the land today, a whisper of something greater calling out to those who will listen. For too long we have sought our own way, lifted our own voices, and trusted in our own strength. But the Word of God reminds us humility opens the door, silence guards the heart, and focus on Him brings direction and life. Today I want to speak to you about a path that is often overlooked yet powerful beyond measure, the path of humbling yourself, staying silent, and turning your gaze fully upon God. For in a world full of noise, distraction, and pride, the quiet heart is the one God honors, the soul He guides, and the life He blesses. There is a call that echoes through the corridors of time, a voice that whispers to the hearts of men and women alike, a summons to look beyond the distractions, beyond the clamor of the world, and to turn your eyes toward the one who is eternal, the one who is unchanging, the one who holds all things in His hand. The Scriptures have long testified to the truth that those who humble themselves before the Lord, those who silence the clamor of their own minds, and those who fix their gaze upon Him shall be lifted, shall be guided, and shall find a peace that surpasses all understanding. And yet, in the days in which we live, how easily we forget, how quickly we are drawn into the whirlwind of our own ambitions, the relentless pursuit of recognition, the constant yearning to be seen and heard by the world around us. The enemy knows the power of distraction. He knows the potency of pride. He knows the weakness of the heart that forgets to be still. And so he presses and he prods and he whispers lies, tempting us to lift our own voices, to exalt our own achievements, and to trust in our own strength. But the Lord says, "Be still and know that I am God." He says, "Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He shall lift you up." He says, "Turn your eyes upon me, and I will be your light, your shield, and your strength." There is a wisdom in humility that the world cannot comprehend, a power in silence that the flesh resists, a clarity in focusing solely on God that no human effort can replicate. And it is in these simple yet profound acts, turning away from self, holding our tongues and centering our hearts on Him, that the heart is refined, the spirit is strengthened, and the soul is awakened to the presence of the Almighty. Consider the story of the prophets of old, those who walked in obedience and saw wonders beyond comprehension, who spoke the word of the Lord with authority because their lives had been shaped by silence, by reflection, by a single-minded devotion to the Creator of heaven and earth. They did not seek their own glory. They did not cry out for accolades or applause. They waited, they listened, they watched, and they moved when God's timing was perfect. And so it must be with us. For we are called not to chase the fleeting shadows of worldly approval, but to anchor our souls in the eternal truth of God's presence. When the heart is humble, it becomes fertile ground for the seeds of heaven. When the tongue is restrained, it becomes a vessel for wisdom. When the eyes are fixed on God, every step we take is guided by His hand, every decision illuminated by His light, and every challenge transformed into an opportunity for His glory to be revealed. There is a discipline in silence, a strength in restraint, a beauty in humility that cannot be manufactured by human effort, that cannot be replicated by mere words or fleeting gestures. It is cultivated in the quiet moments, in the unseen acts of obedience, in the private prayers whispered when no one is watching, in the surrender of one's own will to the will of God. And in those moments, though the world may scoff, though the flesh may resist, though the heart may grow weary, a transformation takes place. The proud are humbled, the restless are stilled, the seekers find rest in the presence of the Almighty, and the soul begins to walk in a new dimension of spiritual clarity and purpose. For the Lord does not lift those who exalt themselves. He does not grant wisdom to those who demand to be heard. He does not pour out favor on those who seek their own way, but He does honor the humble. He does answer the silent prayer. He does direct the one whose heart is fully focused upon Him. And so the question must be asked, are we willing to humble ourselves, to silence our own agendas, to turn our gaze fully upon the Lord? Are we ready to let go of the noise, the clamor, the endless pursuit of recognition, and embrace the stillness, the quiet, the surrender that God calls us to? It is not an easy path. The flesh resists, the world ridicules, the enemy mocks, yet every step toward humility is a step toward freedom. Every moment of silence is a doorway to revelation. Every act of focus upon God is a conduit for His power to flow into our lives. Consider the lessons written in the lives of those who walked before us. Joseph, who remained silent when accused unjustly, who endured betrayal and imprisonment, who waited in patience and humility until the appointed time of God revealed his destiny. Daniel, who knelt in quiet devotion, who refused to bow to earthly powers, who found favor and wisdom because his heart was steadfast and his eyes were fixed upon God. Moses, who led a nation not by his own strength, but by his willingness to humble himself, to listen, to obey, and to trust the guidance of the Almighty. Each of these lives testifies to the principle that the path of humility, silence, and focus upon God is not merely a suggestion. It is the way of life, the conduit of blessing, the channel through which the power of heaven moves on earth. And yet, in our own lives, how often do we choose the easier way? How often do we lift our voices in haste, speak before listening, act before praying, and trust in our own understanding rather than the unfailing wisdom of God? The consequences are clear: confusion, frustration, missed opportunities, hearts weighed down by pride, tongues that wound instead of heal, minds distracted by the fleeting and the temporal. But there is hope. There is always hope for those who turn, who pause, who humble themselves, who silence the noise, and who focus wholly upon the Lord. For the moment we decide to step off the path of self-reliance, the moment we choose the quiet over the clamor, the moment we fix our gaze upon God instead of the fleeting approval of men, a change begins. The Spirit begins to move. The heart begins to align with truth. The soul begins to find rest. And what seemed impossible becomes possible. What seemed uncertain becomes clear. What seemed burdensome becomes light. The call to humility is not a call to weakness, it is a call to strength. The call to silence is not a call to passivity, it is a call to power. The call to focus on God is not a call to isolation. It is a call to intimacy with the one who knows us fully, loves us deeply, and is able to accomplish infinitely more than we could ever imagine. And so we must learn to walk in this way. We must learn to pause before we speak, to bow before we act, to kneel before we move. We must learn to resist the temptation to prove ourselves, to defend ourselves, to exalt ourselves. For when we humble ourselves, when we remain silent, when we focus on God, we position ourselves in alignment with the divine. We step into the flow of His purpose. We open the door to blessings that cannot be earned, to wisdom that cannot be acquired by effort alone, to peace that surpasses understanding. There is a refining fire in this process, a testing that reveals the true state of the heart. Pride is burned away, impatience is tempered, distracting desires are set aside, and what remains is the pure, unshakable foundation of faith, the unwavering anchor of trust, the steady light of a life fully surrendered to God. The Scriptures tell us, he who humbles himself will be exalted, and indeed this is the pattern repeated throughout history. Those who have sought recognition for themselves have faded into obscurity. Those who have boasted of their own strength have fallen by the wayside. But those who have humbled themselves, who have waited, who have trusted, who have focused on God alone, have risen to heights beyond imagination. They have seen visions, they have received guidance, they have walked in paths marked by favor and divine provision. And we are called to walk that same path, to embrace that same discipline, to live that same principle today in our homes, in our workplaces, in our communities, in every corner of our lives. For it is not the loud, the boastful, the impatient who change the world. It is the humble, the silent, the focused. It is those who trust in God, who lean not on their own understanding, who wait for His timing, who obey His instructions. And as we stand on the threshold of our own lives, we must ask ourselves, will we choose this way? Will we surrender our pride? Will we quiet our tongues? Will we fix our gaze entirely upon the Lord, trusting that His wisdom is greater than our plans, that His timing is perfect, that His strength is made perfect in our weakness? There is power in such a choice, an unseen yet undeniable force that begins to work in the hearts of those who embrace it. It transforms relationships, restores hope, renews purpose, and revives the soul. It turns confusion into clarity, fear into courage, weakness into strength. And as we continue to humble ourselves, to remain silent in the right moments, to focus solely on God, we begin to experience a life that is no longer dictated by circumstance or opinion, a life that flows in harmony with heaven, a life that radiates the presence of the Almighty in every word, every action, every thought. The world may not understand it, the world may mock it, the world may resist it, but God honors it and God moves through it. He lifts the humble, He strengthens the quiet, He guides the focused, and it is here, in this sacred alignment, that miracles are born, that destinies are fulfilled, that hearts are transformed, that lives are forever changed, and that the glory of God is revealed in ways both seen and unseen, in ways both powerful and mysterious, in ways that testify to the enduring truth that when we humble ourselves, stay silent, and focus on Him, we walk not by our own strength, but by the power of the Almighty. There is a profound truth that the world struggles to understand, a reality that escapes the eyes of those who live for recognition, for applause, for the fleeting approval of men. It is a truth as old as creation, a principle written into the very fabric of life, a secret revealed through the ages to those who have ears to hear and hearts to receive. That true strength is born in humility, that true guidance comes in silence, and that true vision emerges only when the soul is wholly focused on God. The Scriptures testify again and again to the path of the humble, to the blessing that comes upon the quiet, to the favor that rests upon the one whose gaze does not wander after the distractions of the world. Yet we live in a time of noise, a time of shouting, a time when every platform demands attention, when every voice clamors to be heard, when the value of a person is measured not by their character, but by the volume of their voice, by the speed of their ascent, by the brilliance of their self-promotion. And in the midst of this, the call to humility, the call to silence, the call to focus on God is often overlooked, often dismissed, often resisted, yet it is here, in this quiet, in this surrender, in this unwavering devotion, that the greatest power is revealed, the clearest wisdom is found, the deepest joy is experienced. Consider the nature of humility. It is not weakness. It is not submission to oppression. It is not self-denial for the sake of proving oneself. It is the recognition of truth, that life is not governed by our will alone, that the world does not bend to our desires, that our own understanding is limited, that we are not the center of the universe, and that there is a God who reigns above all, who holds all things in His hand, who knows the beginning from the end, who orchestrates events beyond our comprehension, and who calls us to align our lives with His purposes. Humility is the acknowledgement that we are vessels, instruments through which God works, channels through which His glory is revealed, and participants in a divine plan that is far greater than our imagination. And yet the flesh resists humility. Pride whispers in the heart, "You are capable, you are deserving, you must be heard, you must assert yourself, you must make your mark." And the world reinforces this, telling us that success comes through self-promotion, that influence comes through boldness, that recognition comes through speaking first, acting swiftly, and seeking the spotlight. But the Word of God tells a different story. It tells us that the exalted are those who lower themselves, that the wise are those who listen, that the blessed are those who wait in quiet obedience. And in the lives of those who have walked this path before us, we see the evidence. Abraham, who listened to the voice of God and left his familiar land without fanfare, without argument, without protest, trusting in the promise of a God he could not yet see. Esther, who moved in patience and discernment, restraining her words until the appointed hour, and thereby saved a nation. John the Baptist, who lived a life of solitude and preparation, pointing others to Christ while stepping aside himself, and whose voice, though quiet, carried the power of heaven. Every story, every testimony, every life that bore the mark of divine favor reveals the pattern. Humility opens the door. Silence protects the heart, and focus on God reveals the path. There is a discipline to this way of life, a rigorous training of the spirit, a continual surrender of self. It begins in small moments, choosing to listen when the instinct is to speak, choosing to serve when the desire is to be served, choosing to pray when the temptation is to act in haste. And as these small acts accumulate, they form a foundation of character, a bedrock of integrity, a spring of spiritual power that cannot be shaken. Silence, in particular, is a weapon and a shield. In a world that never stops talking, silence preserves clarity. In a world obsessed with reaction, silence allows discernment. In a world that values opinion over truth, silence opens the door to revelation. When we refrain from speaking impulsively, when we restrain the urge to justify ourselves, when we withhold the need to be understood, we create space for God to speak, for His wisdom to guide, for His Spirit to move. And it is here, in the quiet, in the surrender, in the stillness, that we begin to understand the fullness of His plan, to see the unseen, to hear the unheard, to walk the path that has been laid before us since the foundations of the earth were established. Focusing on God is the culmination of humility and silence. It is the heart's alignment with the divine, the mind's surrender to truth, the soul's devotion to the eternal. It is not merely looking at God in fleeting moments of prayer or praise. It is a constant, deliberate, intentional fixing of the eyes, the heart, and the life upon Him. It is living each day with the awareness that God is the source of wisdom, the author of life, the ruler over circumstances, the provider of every need, the sustainer of every breath. When our focus shifts from ourselves to Him, the burdens of life are lightened, the paths of confusion are clarified, the temptations of pride lose their grip, and the promises of God begin to manifest in ways that defy human expectation. And yet, focusing on God requires vigilance. The heart is easily distracted. The mind is easily swayed. The world offers 1,000 lures, each promising fulfillment but delivering only emptiness. And so we must guard our attention, discipline our thoughts, and anchor our hearts in His Word. We must rise each day with the intention to seek Him first, to hear His voice, to obey His guidance, and to trust His timing. Every act of obedience, every choice to humble oneself, every moment of silence, and every gaze fixed upon God strengthens the spirit, builds character, and opens the door to blessings that cannot be manufactured by effort alone. There is a profound joy in this journey, a deep satisfaction, a peace that passes understanding, a security that the world cannot give. For when we walk in humility, when we remain silent before reacting, when we focus on God above all else, we find a life that is ordered, purposeful, and infused with meaning. Challenges are no longer merely obstacles, they become opportunities for growth. Trials are no longer burdens. They become platforms for faith to be proven and refined. Temptations are no longer traps. They become moments to exercise trust, patience, and obedience. And the life that emerges is not one of fleeting success or temporary acclaim, but one of enduring legacy, spiritual richness, and eternal impact. Consider the quiet me. Miracles that occur when the heart aligns with heaven. A word spoken at the right moment, a door opened that seemed firmly closed, a relationship restored that appeared irreparable, a path illuminated that was once shrouded in darkness. These are not coincidences. These are the works of God moving through a humble, silent, and focused life. And the beauty of this principle is that it is accessible to all. It does not depend on status, wealth, education, or fame. It depends solely on the posture of the heart, the willingness to surrender, the courage to be still, the discipline to seek God above all else. And so in our daily lives, in our work, in our families, in our communities, we are called to this higher standard, to speak less, to serve more, to trust fully, to obey consistently, to look to God in every decision, to anchor ourselves in His promises, to humble our hearts, restrain our tongues, and fix our eyes on the eternal. It is not a popular path. It is not the path that the world celebrates. It is not the path of immediate gratification, but it is the path that leads to life, to blessing, to divine favor, to strength that cannot be shaken, to wisdom that cannot be bought, to peace that cannot be stolen. And as we embrace it, as we commit to it, as we walk in it faithfully, we begin to see the transformation within ourselves, within our families, within our spheres of influence. Pride diminishes, patience increases, understanding deepens, clarity emerges, hearts are aled, and lives are touched in ways that testify to the power of God at work. And we realize that the journey itself, the discipline itself, the posture itself is the blessing, for it draws us closer to Him, molds us into His image, aligns us with His purposes, and prepares us for the inheritance that He has promised to those who remain steadfast, obedient, humble, silent, and focused on Him. There is a truth that echoes across the ages, a truth that reverberates through the pages of Scripture, a truth that calls to the soul even in the midst of chaos and confusion, that the life most blessed, most guided, most fruitful is the life that humbles itself before God, restrains its own voice, and keeps its gaze fixed upon Him. This truth is simple, yet profound. It is easy to speak of, but difficult to live. It is a path that few choose, yet it is the path that leads to favor, to wisdom, to life. For the world teaches the opposite. The world tells us to lift ourselves up, to declare our own worth, to demand recognition, to make ourselves known, to prove our value in the eyes of men. The flesh longs to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be celebrated. And so we push, we strive, we compete, we speak, we act, we assert, all in the pursuit of fleeting approval. But the Word of God calls us to another way, a way that is counterintuitive, a way that is often misunderstood, a way that requires a surrender of self, a quieting of the spirit, a steadfast focus upon Him. Humility is the beginning. It is the posture that opens the heart to God's wisdom, that softens the soul to His guidance, that prepares the life for divine influence. Humility is not thinking less of oneself. It is thinking of oneself less. It is the recognition that life is not governed by our own understanding, that the future is held in the hands of the Almighty, that the world does not revolve around our desires or our plans, and that the path to blessing is found not in self-exaltation, but in submission to the One who holds all things together. When we humble ourselves, we create space for God to work. We step out of the way, and His hand moves. We silence the distractions of pride, and His voice becomes audible. We release the need to control, to argue, to justify, and suddenly the miraculous begins to manifest in ways that we could never orchestrate on our own. And yet, humility alone is not enough. It must be paired with silence, with restraint, with the discipline to hold our tongues, to restrain our impulses, to wait before speaking, to pause before acting. Silence is not empty. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not passivity. Silence is a weapon. Silence is a shield. Silence is the soil in which wisdom grows, the atmosphere in which revelation flourishes, the stage upon which the Spirit of God moves freely. Consider the power of silence in the lives of those who walked in obedience before us. Moses, who spoke to Pharaoh only when directed by God, whose words carried authority because they were not hurried, whose life demonstrated that power flows from the Spirit and not from the tongue. Elijah, who heard God not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still small voice, teaching us that sometimes the loudest movement is the quietest moment. Jesus Himself, who often withdrew to pray in solitude, who did not defend Himself against accusation, who spoke with purpose and not haste, who revealed that the posture of the heart is more powerful than the volume of one's speech. And so we see that silence is sacred. It is a discipline that tests the flesh, that refines the spirit, that prepares the soul to receive divine wisdom and power. And when silence is combined with focus, when the mind, the heart, the soul are wholly centered upon God, a transformation occurs. The world's chaos fades into perspective. The pressures of life are weighed in the balance of eternity. Decisions are guided by divine wisdom rather than human impulse. Relationships are governed by love rather than ego. Challenges are approached with faith rather than fear. And the life that emerges is not ordinary. It is a life marked by clarity, by power, by favor, by purpose, by the unmistakable presence of God. Focusing on God is the culmination of humility and silence. It is the act of fixing the eyes on the eternal, of directing the mind toward His truth, of orienting the heart toward His will. It is a conscious, deliberate, unrelenting commitment to see His hand in all things, to hear His voice above all others, to obey His guidance without hesitation, to trust His timing even when it defies human logic. And this focus brings freedom. Freedom from anxiety, freedom from distraction, freedom from the endless striving that comes from seeking approval from men. Freedom from the burden of trying to prove oneself. Freedom from the lies that whisper, you are alone, you are powerless, you are forgotten. When God becomes the center, everything else falls into place. The paths that seemed uncertain become clear. The doors that were shut begin to open. The opportunities that were hidden become visible. The fears that plagued the heart are replaced with courage. The doubts that haunted the mind are replaced with confidence. The soul finds rest that the world cannot give, a peace that passes understanding, a joy that cannot be shaken, a purpose that cannot be thwarted. And yet, this life is not without testing. The enemy opposes the humble, the silent, the focused. Pride rises to challenge. Distractions multiply. Voices demand attention. Circumstances tempt one to step away from God's guidance. Impatience urges action before instruction. And fear threatens to break the resolve. But it is precisely in these moments that the power of humility, silence, and focus is revealed. For when the heart remains lowly, the tongue restrained, and the eyes fixed upon God, the Spirit intervenes. Strength is supplied, wisdom is imparted, guidance is clarified, and what seemed impossible becomes possible. What seemed unattainable is suddenly within reach. What seemed overwhelming is made light. The Scriptures testify repeatedly to this principle. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Be still and know that I am God. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time. These are not mere words. They are promises. They are laws of the spiritual universe. They are assurances that the life lived in humility, silence, and focus is not wasted, is not ignored, is not overlooked. Every step taken in obedience, every act of restraint, every moment of concentrated devotion is recorded, remembered, and honored by the Almighty. And the rewards are eternal, not just temporal. Wisdom that guides through life's storms, favor that opens doors that seem closed, relationships that flourish in love and understanding, influence that carries weight beyond one's own ability, peace that steadies the heart in trials, joy that sustains the soul in sorrow, purpose that endures beyond the limits of time, and ultimately a life that fulfills the calling for which we were created. The path is narrow. The journey is long, the discipline is rigorous, but the result is unparalleled. It is the life of the faithful, the life of the obedient, the life of those who have learned that true greatness is not found in the applause of men, but in the favor of God, that true strength is not in loud voices, but in the stillness of the Spirit, that true wisdom is not in human understanding, but in the revelation that comes from a humble, silent, focused heart. And so we are called to this path, to humble ourselves daily, to quiet our tongues, to silence the impulses that drive us, to remove the distractions that cloud our minds, to turn our gaze wholly upon God, to seek His wisdom in every decision, to obey His instruction in every circumstance, to trust His timing in every season. It is a life of surrender, but not of defeat. It is a life of restraint, but not of limitation. It is a life of devotion, but not of emptiness. It is a life of power, because the power of God flows through the heart that is lowly, through the lips that are restrained, through the eyes that are fixed upon Him. And as we embrace this truth, as we live this principle, as we walk in this alignment, we begin to see the unfolding of His promises. Doors open, provision flows, guidance becomes clear, opportunities multiply, relationships are restored, hearts are strengthened, faith grows, courage increases, peace abides, joy overflows, purpose is revealed, and the presence of God becomes tangible in every aspect of life. And the world, which once seemed chaotic and confusing, begins to make sense. The noise that once distracted us fades into background. The demands that once pressured us are weighed against eternity. The ambitions that once enslaved us are redirected toward divine purpose. The fears that once paralyzed us are replaced with trust. And in this life, there is a testimony, there is a witness, there is a legacy that endures beyond the limits of time, that speaks of the power of humility, of the necessity of silence, of the reward of focusing wholly on God. This is the path of blessing. This is the path of strength. This is the path of wisdom. This is the path that leads not only to life, but to abundant life, to life that is marked by the presence of God, by the favor of heaven, by the guidance of the Spirit, by the peace that surpasses understanding, and by the assurance that we are walking exactly where He has called us to walk. And so we must choose it. We must commit to it. We must live it in every moment, in every decision, in every thought, in every word, in every action, in every season, in every trial, in every blessing, in every uncertainty, in every circumstance, knowing that the path of humility, silence, and focus on God is the path of life, the path of divine favor, the path that fulfills the purpose for which we were created, and the path that ensures that our lives will bear fruit that will last, that will impact generations, that will glorify the one who has called us, who sustains us, and who loves us beyond measure.